The teachings of General Conference are the considerations the Lord would have before us now and in the months ahead.
Our marching orders for each 6 months are found in the General Conference addresses.
For the next 6 months, your conference edition of the Ensign should stand next to your standard works and be referred to frequently.
I encourage you to read the talks once again and to ponder the messages contained therein.
I exhort you to study the messages of this conference frequently, even repeatedly, during the next 6 months.
You're listening to the Conference Talk podcast, where it's conference weekend every weekend. Each weekend, we discuss talks from the most recent General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's right. We'll share some insights, make some connections, and have a bit of fun as we study the words of the awesome men and women that God has called to direct his church in the latter days. I'm Shelby Christensen.
And I'm Brett Kane. And in this episode, we're talking about Elder Garrett W. Gong's address titled Holiness to the Lord in Everyday Life. I actually really loved this talk, and in preparing for this, I just listened to it over and over and over again, and I've actually got a very old school paper copy of the conference addresses, and I reread it, and reading it was such a different experience than listening to it. I don't know if you've had similar experiences with actually reading the conference talks.
Yes, I did the same thing. I listened to it a couple times, and then I printed it out. I know we can. I mean, we get the conference magazine for free now, but I printed it out and definitely had a different experience reading it and marking it up than I did listening to it too.
It's crazy that you have a printer. I feel like very few people have printers.
I homeschool.
Oh, perfect.
So my husband got a really nice industrial type printer at one of his job sites. And at the end of their projects, all the stuff that they use in their office and things, they get rid of. They don't keep it. They either throw it away or they donate it or something. And so he kept the printer and we brought it into our office, and so I use it for homeschool and other things. So yeah, I know I'm old school.
Yeah, well, and that's a good thing too. So we homeschool our daughter. I should say my wife homeschools because I'm not a ton of help in that regard. But we go through a charter so that they'll give us some funds for school supplies, and one of the things they gave us was a printer. And it's funny that things like printers that were so important when you and I were growing up are now kind of anachronistic because you can sign documents on your phone. It's just like it's so digital, and there are very few physical things. But I think it is a good thing to have, and so I'm glad that you're able to print out this talk. I love the way he starts this out, and artificial intelligence is getting so popular, and I'll just read this little story from Elder Gong. Our recent Gong family reunion included a fun talent show complete with a dad jokes contest, but this contest was unusual. On one team was Grandpa, me, and two of the grandchildren, ages 12 and 11. On the other team was an artificial intelligence AI program prompted by a cousin to tell dad jokes in the style of Garrett W. Gong. Grandpa Garrett Gong versus AI Garrett Gong. And it's so funny what the AI joke was, because it wasn't even a joke. It was almost like a little
conference
less.
talk.
Yeah, exactly. My wife is doing school online, and she emailed one of her professors a question about one of the assignments. And the last two assignments, she's been so stressed over, and she got 100% on because she's super smart. But she got a response from her professor on one of the questions, and she's like 100% certain it was an AI generated response because it didn't really address the question, and it just the way it was phrased. On my podcast, I've had a friend. He's also a member of the church, and he runs a coding boot camp called Shaolin AI. And he kind of talks about that because I can't even spell AI, um, but it's amazing the technology that's out there. But um, when when it goes on, and I thought that Elder Gong was going to talk more about artificial intelligence as Elder Bednar recently did in kind of a follow up to his talk from, I can't remember if it was 2009 or 2007. Do you remember when he gave that talk, Things as They Really Are? And it was kind of talking
Oh,
about the problems with video games and
I know what you're talking about. I don't, it
Mhm.
was around that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so
Which is crazy
cyberspace.
because like back then, like we weren't even anywhere to where we are now. Like it's so much like it's just it it's really like interesting to me how our leaders will give us topics and talks and counsel on things that like really don't seem that bad at the moment or like they're that serious, and then we get to the point where they do become serious and like whoa, okay, so this is like almost like forewarning or preparation, like be prepared for this to like escalate kind of thing. But
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was funny that he went on and he kind of shifted, and Elder Gong says, all around us are opportunities to laugh, delight, see with grateful eyes. Ours is a gospel of joy and holiness in everyday life. And I love this part because Elder Kieran, he gave his talk, uh, and he said, "Welcome to the Church of Joy." And so I feel like joy was kind of a common theme in this conference. Anything else stand out to you from the first couple paragraphs of this talk?
yeah, I love, well, just going on that same paragraph that you were just at, it says holiness sets things apart for sacred purpose. But holiness also invites us to infuse daily living with the sacred, to rejoice in daily bread amidst this world's thistles and thorns. To walk with the Lord, we must become holy, for He is holy, and to help us become holy, the Lord invites us to walk with Him. That one part, holiness also invites us to infuse daily living with the sacred. So making each day holy, just little bits. It doesn't mean like you have to like completely have your entire day like completely devoted to reading the scriptures and prayer. Obviously that's not realistic. We still live in this world and we still have to do worldly things and we have to carry on with our daily lives. But I like how it says infuse daily living with the sacred. So we're just like throughout the day just like continuing to like input Christ into our lives, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through service, whether it's through like the simple things like playing with your children, listening to your children, and or like instead of like screaming and yelling because you're frustrated with something your child has done, it's sitting down, getting to their level and listening to them and listening to their feelings. That's what Christ would do. He wouldn't yell, right? And so that's just something that was kind of a theme for me throughout the whole talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love that. And I like that idea of kind of that two-way street. Holiness thing sets things apart for sacred purpose, but holiness also invites us to infuse daily living with the sacred. And so I think that really presents a lot of unique opportunities to do mundane things in a holy way. And a friend of mine, Michael Peroni, he wrote a really great article. He's a member of the church as well, and a couple months ago, and it was called "Holy Monotony." And he was using the example of "It's a Wonderful Life." Have you seen that movie with Jimmy
Love
Stewart?
that movie. It's one
I
of
love
my
that movie.
favorite Christmas movies.
Absolutely. And I hadn't seen it for a long, long time. And we watched it, just before Christmas, and my daughter had never seen it. And it really struck me. Like, I haven't watched it since being a father, for 9 years now. And it was totally different. But kind of talking about how, like, you do have to do kind of mundane things, but there is holiness in that. And I think also we can supplement our day-to-day things with something sacred. I have to drive a lot for work, so I can either listen to a podcast or music, or I can listen to a conference talk, or even a church-centric podcast. And I think that really helps. What are some things that you do? Obviously, as a homeschooling mom, you have a ton to do. So what does that infusion look like for you?
Um, so I try in the morning, like when I'm taking a shower, I try to listen to like gospel music or like even just Christian music. I've been trying to listen to more Christ-centered music recently. My husband had that goal last year for himself, and I decided to make that a goal for myself this year, is to like my Spotify, rap thing, to be like my top genre would be like Christian or something like that. And so I've been listening to a lot of Christian artists and things like that in the morning. And then like what you were talking about, I listen to audiobooks too throughout the day. It's I read physical books, but I also listen to audiobooks. It's how I get my book numbers to be higher than what they probably would be if I was reading just a single book. But instead of like jumping onto one of my books, I'll try to listen to some scriptures or try to listen to a talk as well. Every week I listen to the Don't Miss This podcast. I really love that podcast. David Butler is one of my favorite people to listen to. And just like what you said, is making the mundane sacred or making the mundane holy. Like I follow this girl, her name is Tessa, and I actually am taking her. She's become very popular on social media about alignment journaling. And basically it's a way of aligning, creating your reality, the reality that you want. And something that I really love that she does is like she makes sure like in the morning she sets a time for scripture and for journaling and prayer. But like even when her kids wake up, when she's trying to do it alone before they wake up, like she still talks about doing it. And like and she shows that she still does it. But this next part of the talk just kind of made me think of her. It says, you live 7 C's: communion with God, community and compassion with each other, commitment and covenant with God, family, and friends, centered in Jesus Christ. And what she does with alignment journaling is like taking things that would seem like, oh, this is going to ruin my day, or oh, this life is hard, being a parent is hard, or I can't believe my kid did that. Like she flips it around. So it's like, I can't believe my kid woke up when I'm trying to have some time alone. Be like, isn't it awesome that my son knew that I was awake and he wanted to spend some extra quality time with me this morning, like stuff like that. And so even that to me is a way of making your home more holy or your life more holy, is not letting everyday things that might happen and might in other times make you upset or whatever, but it makes you kind of like slow down and be in the moment. And I feel like that also allows a sense of spirit to flow within us, and for our homes to even feel the spirit more, because we're able to just like not have contention within ourselves or within the environment around us. I don't know if I'm making my point come across very well. It's just a thought I had and a feeling that I had just thinking about this and thinking about how I look up to her and her example on how she leads her life is kind of something that I want to. And I think one of them is a member of the church. I don't know if it's her or her husband, because I've seen that she has general conference on conference weekend. I've seen in her stories where it's on. So one of them is a member. I know that both of them aren't, but anyways, so
No,
I'm getting off on a tangent
no,
now.
no, I love it. And that actually does make perfect sense. One thing that, we try to do is, my daughter, she likes to do crafts and play with toys, and she's a really good singer. And I love quiet. Like I just want everything quiet. I don't like one of my favorite rules that my dad had for us as kids, like when we'd be playing with our cousins or our friends, my dad's like, no screaming unless you're hurt, then you can scream, but you can always like, you just, we don't, You don't need to be
I
like
like that.
loud. Yeah, just good rule. Um,
Yeah.
but just any noise, and so, but I realized like, hey, it's a good thing for my daughter to sing while she's drawing or while she's doing things. So I never stifle her, and that's something my wife and I try to do is just don't stifle that. It's like and if my daughter says, hey, can we play? Instead of saying no, I'm busy, even if I am busy, just say yes, and we'll play for a couple minutes. It's like, okay, now I have to do. And so I really feel like it's a great exercise to become more like God, is to be able to prioritize and execute the things that we have to do, because God's never too busy for us. God never gets frustrated. God's not too tired, to get us a glass of water before. But it's just like God doesn't have to deal with those things. And yes,
Yeah.
of course we're mortal, and we have all these failings, but I think it's a really good opportunity to stretch. And so I love what you're talking about, just putting that positive spin on things, like, oh, isn't it great that my son knew that I was awake and wanted to spend some extra time. And I think that we see that a lot. Elder Cook, a couple conferences ago, gave a talk about just assume that everybody is trying their best,
Hmm.
that assuming positive intent. And I think that that's really cool. So I'm glad you brought that up. I like what Elder Gong says next. He says, we each have a story, which is so true. I love that. And he goes to talk about a couple different things. And uh, he says, your stories of holiness to the Lord in everyday life inspire us. You live 7 C's, like the letter C: communion with God, community and compassion with each other, commitment and covenant with God, family, and friends, centered in Jesus Christ. And it's funny that he said 7 C's, like the letter C, because, like sail the 7 C's, like
Hmm.
SEA. I wonder if he planned that number. He goes on, growing evidence highlights this striking fact. Religious believers are, on average, happier, healthier, and more fulfilled than those without spiritual commitment or connection. And this was really fascinating. Like I always assumed this, but I didn't realize that there is actual research and evidence to support this. Did anything from this part stand out to you?
Just, I mean, it just made me think like just that statement where he says religious believers are on average happier and healthier and more fulfilled than those without spiritual commitment and connection. Um, because I remember seeing, I don't know, I think I remember seeing like it was like an article or a news report or something that actually said like talked about that and talked about specifically at the time. It was a long time ago, but at the time it was like this is gonna sound so silly, but people in Utah tended to be healthier and happier. And I think that at the time, I mean, a large number of the members of the church was in Utah at the time, and I mean, still is. But I also know, like, we're growing worldwide. But um, I also remember, um, you know, people asking, I not people pointing out, like people who are religious, like they can see that people are happier. Like they'll ask, people will ask, like, why are you so happy all the time? And it's because I have Christ in my life, like, you know. Um, so yeah. And I down here he says what researchers call religious structural stability offers clarity, purpose, and inspiration amidst life's twists and turns. So they're calling it religious structural stability. Um, and I mean, it makes sense because when you build your foundation on Jesus Christ, when you have Christ at the center of your life, you can overcome the hard parts of life and still be happy because you feel His presence in your life, and that brings you joy. And you also are able to see the blessings that come into our lives each and every day, and you're able to recognize those things, which makes you, it testifies to you that Christ is real and that God is real. And so in turn also makes you more happy. So it's just this like constant foundational cycle.
Yeah, I really like that. One of my friends from the interwebs, Laren, and we'll have to get her on this podcast. She's great, but she posted on Twitter X. Imagine if your physical beauty was directly related to how you treated people. And then my other
Mm,
friend, Stymie, we'll have to get him on the show too. He said it is, and I really think like that's true when we talk about countenances and when members of the church have gone to give humanitarian aid to parts of the world where we're not allowed to proselyte. It's funny that a lot of the people say like you can't do anything about the way that you look and the way that people feel around you, and that is that is sharing the gospel. So
yeah,
I like that a lot.
definitely.
Yeah, and um, he asks a great question. Elder Gong does next. He says, "What does holiness to the Lord in everyday life look like?" And I think it's going to look different for everyone. And I want to actually circle back to the word infuse. I mean, what do you think of when you hear the word infuse?
Just okay, so I for some reason just um this is gonna sound so silly. Okay, so like the dry ice drinks. I just think of that like it just like is filling. I don't know how to explain it. But it's just like you have your drink already and then you just drop the dry ice and it fills it with something that makes it something else entirely, right? And so and it's not the whole thing all the time. Like infuse, I feel like is like spurts. You know what I mean? It's not just like constant. But yeah, I don't know if that made sense.
No, no, it totally does. And like, it's funny that because I feel like infused water has gotten really
Yeah.
popular, and
Hmm.
you can put all sorts of things in water
Makes it
and
better.
it makes it better. You can like, I've cucumber, lemon, I've
Hmm.
seen pineapple. I feel like, I think it's Costa Vida has like infused waters there, and they just you put stuff in it. Mint
Hmm.
is really fun. Yeah, just all sorts of things. So I had a physical agility test yesterday for a police department that I'm applying with, and it was intense. You're climbing walls, running obstacle courses, and this one girl was sitting next to me afterward when we were waiting for our interview, and I could tell she was dehydrated. Said, "Did you bring water?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm so bad at drinking water. It tastes like spit to me." I'm like, "Just put other stuff in it. Like you can literally just like put a lemon in it or a cucumber." And so I think like that is what the gospel is. And the longer you let it sit there, the more flavor it permeates it. So I think that when you take any aspect of gospel living and just put it into something that you do normally, like,
Hmm.
maybe you listen to a conference talk in the shower or on the drive or while working out, just things that you normally do, and you add that extra ingredient, it changes the whole thing of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can definitely notice when I am doing those little things, like adding those little things throughout my day, especially in the morning, because it kind of sets the tone for the day, right? I can notice in my life, like when I'm not doing it, how much of a difference it makes too. Like I am a lot less patient. I am like a little bit more irritable, or I feel more rushed. I feel, like I need to get everything done all at once. And when I have God in my life first, or even throughout the day, like I I tend to slow down. I tend to, be in the moment. I tend to be more patient and listen better. And so I can definitely tell the contrast between the two.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I think this is a good question for everyone to ask and themselves. What does holiness to the Lord in everyday life look like? And he goes on to give some really good examples. And I love this first one. Holiness to the Lord in everyday life looks like two faithful young adults married for a year, sharing with authenticity and vulnerability, gospel covenant sacrifice and service in their unfolding lives. She begins, in high school, I was in a dark place. I felt like God wasn't there for me. One night, a text from a friend said, Hey, have you read Alma 36 ever? As I started reading, she said, I was overcome with peace and love. I felt like I was being given this big hug. When I read Alma 36:12, I knew Heavenly Father saw me and knew exactly how I was feeling. I think that's awesome. And there are two good examples there. You know, she gets a text from a friend said, Hey, have you ever read this? And I think that's really cool. I teach seminary now. I was newly called seminary teacher just a couple weeks ago. And so talking to high schoolers and I forget like how hard it was being in high school and being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I think this is a really good example. And I think in any marriage, whether you've been married for a year or 30 years, authenticity and vulnerability is really important when talking about gospel covenants, sacrifice, and service. And I love the imagery he uses in unfolding lives. So I recently celebrated my 10th anniversary, and I
Oh,
feel
happy
like I'm,
anniversary.
oh, thank you. And I feel like I'm just figuring this out. And I'm like, man, like I thought I was super patient. I thought I was like a good husband. And I look back, I'm like, man, I was like a freaking idiot. And so I apologized to him. I was like, man, I don't know how you stayed married to me this long. Um, but it does get better. Uh, yeah, and anything from this story or a couple of the others that you particularly liked?
Well, as you continue, she talks about how she told her fiance before they got married that she didn't have a great testimony of tithing. And her fiance helped explain, he's like, it's not about money, but following commandment that asked of us. So he challenged her to start paying tithing. And I've been in that position before, where I'm like, why? So one, I had a little bit of a problem. So it was in, let me think, 2000. Okay, I think it was in 2016 when it happened, or was it the end of 2015? The church came out and had made a statement or changed a thing saying that children who belong to same gender parents were not allowed to get baptized until they were 18. And that like really frustrated me at first. Like it just, I don't know why it did, but it just like it made me sad. And I was like, why would you keep that from those kids? Um, you know, keep them from being able to make, be able to have those decisions, especially if the parents were willing to give them permission, because you still have to have your parents' permission right before 18. And I really struggled with that one for a little bit. And I was kind of mad. I was like, that's just not fair. Like, and so then what I did is I was like, okay, I had a feeling like, okay, go back to the basics, go back to the basics of your understanding of the gospel. And one of the things that I was brought to remembrance was what I felt when I went to church my first time. Like as an investigator, like I had been in church before with my aunt, but one of the things that I felt when I first came to church as an investigator with my friend and her family was how families were there, right? It was family. It was a family-centered church. And I wanted my family to be like that. I wanted my family to have the gospel and be happy, and I wanted to raise my kids in the gospel. And when and then I realized, and I just went back to the basics. Like, okay, do I know that Joseph Smith is a prophet? Yes. Do I know that he restored the gospel? Yes. So if I know these things, do I know the Book of Mormon is true? Do I know that families are forever? Yes. So if I know these things to be true, then, and I know, and I have a testimony that the prophet is the prophet and the apostles are the apostles, then they're making this decision for a reason. And as I thought more about the family centered, aspect of the church and living the gospel, I was like, well, that makes sense, because if you allow a child who's living in this situation to get baptized before, and I think they've taken that away since then. I think it's been redacted. But at the time,
Yes.
I understood, like, because the teachings of the church go against the lifestyle of the parents. And so it could create confusion for the child. That's something that I just had a feeling of, like, they're taught one thing and then they go home and they're living in another thing, right? And so that was kind of like where my testimony grew a little bit more on the leadership of the church. Like, why did these things have to happen? So it wasn't specifically a commandment, but it was like something that happened, like with policy and stuff changing and stuff. Like, when policy and things change, that can unravel a lot of people. And we've seen that happen a lot, especially in recent years. Like, where for the strength of the youth pamphlet was changing, people were taking that as doctrine. Like, nowhere in doctrine does it say, you can't do this and you can't do that. Like, when it comes to for the strength of the youth, it was guidance from the church, and they took all the specifics out and make it more of like a relationship with God. When policy changes, you have to take yourself out of that and focus on where the doctrine is, because doctrine doesn't change. And so that's my little experience, I guess, with something like that.
I love that. And that's a great example too. And that's the cool thing. We're never going to be wrong if we stay in the mainstream of the
Mm-hmm.
church and we're living the gospel. Whatever policies or practices change, because this is a living church, and it is kind of, I shouldn't say funny because it's actually kind of sad, but as soon as some of the specificity went away from the For the Strength of Youth pamphlet, then everyone just goes, super hard in the paint. And it's like, no, like that's not what it means. It doesn't mean like now you get carte blanche to do whatever you want. It
Yeah.
just, we're being held to a higher standard. It's kind of like if you look at uh, in the Old Testament, these very strict guidelines for what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath day.
Mm-hmm.
No starting fires, no cooking food. It's like you can't take these steps. And the Sabbath is, we know the Sabbath is made for man, but it is a holy day that we should render our devotions to the Lord. And so just because we have to limit the number of steps we take, it doesn't mean that we treat the Sabbath any lighter, or that we don't keep it as holy. It just
Mm-hmm.
means we have to be much more conscientious. It's funny too, because like as a parent, I'm always like watching what my child eats, and it's like, no, you can't have an eighth cookie, or you can't have that treat. And I'm like, man, there's no one stopping me from doing that. Like, I can do whatever I want. It's like, I can just, and so I think like we have to hold ourselves to the right standard. I really like a couple of the stories, and he talks about uh, an athlete going on a
Mm-hmm.
mission, uh, and one of the things that I really liked later was when he talked about a young woman who felt that she didn't really have a strong relationship with her
Mm-hmm.
dad, and she says that for 50 years, another sister yearned for a relationship with her father. Growing up, she says, there were my brothers and my dad, and then there was me, the only daughter. All I ever wanted was to be good enough for my dad. Then my mom passed away. She was my only liaison between my dad and me. One day, the sister said, I heard a voice say, invite your dad and take him to the temple with you. That was the beginning of a twice a month date with my daddy to the house of the Lord. I told my dad I loved him. He told me he loved me too. Spending time in the house of the Lord healed us. My mom could not help us on earth. It took her being on the other side of the veil to help mend what was broken. The temple completed our journey to wholeness as an eternal family. And I just love that so much because, like, I mean, things like that happen. And I don't feel that sometimes we put enough emphasis on miracles like that, that you can hear a voice, you can hear the voice of the Lord, you can see visions, you can get personal revelation, and you should be. I know I skipped ahead from a couple of stories, but was there anything else you liked about that one?
No, that's great. I really like that. Just backtracking a little bit on the paragraph before that story. It says, holiness to the Lord in everyday life feels like a spark arcing across the veil to connect, comfort, and strengthen. And so I think that statement just went perfectly with the story that you shared. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really cool, and there are millions of stories like this.
Hmm.
He goes on, holiness to the Lord in everyday life includes tender moments when loved ones pass. Earlier this year, my dear mother, Jean Gong, slipped into the next days before her 98th birthday. And and that's hard. You know, my sister's father-in-law recently passed, and he was like a grandpa to me. And but I knew and know that he had such a strong testimony. He was such a great example to me. I lived in Utah with my sister uh, before and after my mission, and it was really cool to have Sunday dinners with him all the time. And so I think that this emphasis on holiness to the Lord in everyday life includes tender moments when loved ones pass. And that's
Hmm.
something we don't really think about, that these hard moments in life include holiness to the Lord. And
I
so,
feel like
yeah,
because hard moments tend to bring us closer to God, whether it's through death or through other hardship that you may experience. I feel like they bring us to our knees, seeking for comfort and peace, more so than just like what we were saying, the seemingly mundane things that happen every day. Hardship brings us to those tender times to be more with the Lord.
yeah, that's true. And it's cool what he goes on, and he is a great. I love when general authorities talk about their moms. Uh, you know, Abraham Lincoln talked about how like he owed everything to his angel mother,
Hmm.
and he said, if you asked my mother, would you like Rocky Road, white chocolate ginger, or strawberry ice cream? Mom would say, yes, please. May I taste each one? Who
Hmm.
could say no to your mother, especially when she loved all of life's flavors? Just as an aside, white chocolate ginger sounds like a legit ice cream flavor. Um, but I love that. Loved all of life's flavors.
Yeah, I like that little phrase too.
Have you ever read Harry Potter?
Hmm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And I don't know if you remember, but one of the uh kind of fun things in there were the Birdie Bots every flavored beans. Do you
Yep.
remember that?
Yep.
And I think it's at the end of the first one when uh Albus Dumbledore, he goes to, and he's visiting Harry in the hospital wing, and he takes some of the every flavored beans, and he said he had a very bad experience with one uh, as a child and had never tried them again. But he's like, I'll give it a try now, and he's like, oh, earwax, like that's what you get. And sometimes you get bad flavors. When I was a kid, they used to make this, and I used to buy like a bag of Birdie. They were just like jelly beans or whatever, but they were marketed as every flavored beans at the bookstore. I don't know if they still do that, but
They still
yeah.
have them.
Oh, do they? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's funny. But that is true. All you really have to love all of life's flavors. And Elder Gaunt goes on to say, I once asked mom which decisions had most shaped her life. She said, being baptized a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and moving from Hawaii to the mainland where I met your father. And that's really cool. That
And
that
she was the
was,
only member
yes.
as well. Um, and it says here that my mother had covenant faith and trust in the Lord that blessed her life and all our family generations. Um, yeah, that's a pretty cool story. Elder Gong to come from an only member mother from her family. Yeah.
Yeah, it is really remarkable. One of the things that he shares as well, and he talked about a couple. Oh yeah, here it is. Three friends came to the Bangkok Thailand Temple open house. This
Mm-hmm.
is a place of super healing, said one. And I love when we get strong words like that. That this is a place
Super.
of super healing. Yeah. Anything else you like from that?
I think you're doing really well at pointing out everything that I had highlighted. So, um, down after that experience, he shares about the three friends. He says, with sacred words, our temples invite and proclaim holiness to the Lord, the house of the Lord. He goes on to say, holiness to the Lord makes daily living sacred. It draws us closer and happier to the Lord and each other and prepares us to live with God our Father, Jesus Christ, and our loved ones. So just inviting holiness into your life every single day, like we've been talking about, it does make us happier. Even in the hard times, it makes us happier, and it helps us feel closer to God, and it helps us build our family relationships to be stronger as well, and happier as a whole as well.
Yeah, it 100%. And I love how he ends, holiness to the Lord makes daily living sacred, like you
Mm-hmm.
said. And this was a great part. If and as did my friend, you may wonder if your heavenly Father loves you. The
Mm-hmm.
answer is a resounding, absolute yes. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we all wonder that at times, or even if we know for sure, it's like, yeah, I know God loves me, but this is still really hard, or I don't know why this happened, or why I have to go through this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a good reminder. I wanted actually to read a quick excerpt from Michael Peroni's article, Holy Monotony and the Wonderful Life. So he published this on December 19th, which was my anniversary, which was cool. And he starts with a really cool quote from G.K. Chesterton. Are you familiar with Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing, amazing man, great Christian thinker, an Englishman, and so kind of think like C.S. Lewis
Okay.
in that regard. And he wrote a great mystery series called Father Brown,
Hmm.
about this church father, this abbot, or just a local minister who is also kind of a detective. And they made I think, I'm not sure if it was the BBC, but some British company made a television program, and it had the same actor who plays Arthur Weasley in it. Speaking of
Oh,
Harry Potter, great show, clean, just really, really a good show. But this is the quote from G.K. Chesterton. Children always say, do it again. And the grown up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony, but perhaps God is strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite of infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. And that's the end of the G.K. Chesterton quote, which is so cool because you think about like kids, if like I throw my daughter up in the air and she's like, do it again, or you spin them around or just anything. They're like, do it again, do it again. Uh,
500 times.
yes. And my friend Michael goes on, I read this quote just after my 3-year-old daughter asked me to throw her in the air again for what felt like the 278th consecutive time. Truly, I am less strong than a 3-year-old little girl who never grows tired of her father catching her.
Oh
It,
my gosh.
isn't that sweet?
Yeah, sorry, I cut you off. Go on.
No, no, you're fine. If God exults in directing every sunrise, designing every daisy, touching every grain of sand, endowing every human spirit, then he can be said to engage in a kind of holy monotony from which all creation and beauty spring forth. If this is so, then it is godlike to throw ourselves into the do it agains, which require our souls, hearts, attention, affection, genius, and effort. A monotony that produces a wonderful life, the kind of monotony that teaches men their life has a purpose and what they do matters, which is about the most powerful thing a man can feel. This kind of monotony is rare. Cheap imitations abound. The captivating monotony of technology, algorithms, and scrolling, the atrophying monotony of conforming to the size of a cog in someone else's machine, or the empty monotony of pointless, tedious work. These monotonies require none or little of our spirit, and so they give us nothing but drudgery in return. And I think that really ties in with Elder Gong's talk because like everyday life on its own will produce nothing eternal unless we infuse it with holiness to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an essential ingredient. And so if any aspect of our lives feels like drudgery, it's probably because we're not infusing enough of that into the Lord, enough holiness to the Lord in that aspect. Yeah. Any other thoughts about this talk? It's such a great talk. Everyone should just go and listen to it or read it again and again. But any final thoughts on Elder Gong's talk?
Oh no, I loved that last part that you talked about holy monotony. It made me think of, yeah, just it made me laugh with the throwing your child in the air for the 200th time. Um, but the part where he talks about like having daisies grow, right? If he stopped having daisies grow, those daisies that were already there are eventually going to die, so then it won't be there anymore, right? So if we don't continue to infuse our lives with holiness, with sacred things, like scripture study, prayer, inviting the Spirit into our lives, then our spirit is going to die. Our spirituality is going to die. Our sacredness in our home is going to die. It's not going to be there. We have to continue to do those seemingly mundane things to create greatness in our lives.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's funny too. A couple of my friends from college, they were a big reason why we moved out here from to California from Washington to do this job that I'm doing now. And uh, my friend Daria, amazing, amazing. We were on the Institute Council in college, and she's always making cakes, for like for these really elaborate cakes. And she's really good, but sometimes they don't quite turn out. Have you seen those like Pinterest fails? It's like this is what it should
Uh-huh.
looks like, and
Yeah.
and and I think that there's something really special about that. I mean, like everyone likes homemade things, even if it doesn't like look like a factory produced thing. It's so much better, right?
Right.
You don't want like a mass produced anything. You'd much rather have something handmade or homemade. Uh,
Yeah.
Another quick excerpt from this article from Michael Peroni, and this is just a phenomenal Substack that he has. And it's called Build a Village. So, and we'll post links if anyone wants to follow him. But he references the film It's a Wonderful Life. And he says, at every juncture of the film, It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey sought to escape from his holy monotony and from his many do it again shackles, his uncle's eccentricities, his family duty, his friends' needs, and the war against the deathless Mr. Potter for the fate of his hometown. But his holy monotony had produced a wonderful, excellent life, and not just his own. The film shows us that George's holy monotony paved the way for many other excellent lives, saved the life of his brother, allowed his brother to save many lives in a war, saved the life of a little girl, saved the career and conscience of a pharmacist, gave his wife an opportunity to have a family, kept his uncle from being institutionalized, put a roof over the heads of many other families, redirected the fate of countless others away from the modern monotony offered in Pottersville. Early in the film, George tells his father that if he doesn't do something big, something important, like build tall buildings, plan modern cities, travel the world, etc., then he'd go crazy and bust. Like all men, he longs to matter, and in the end, George Bailey does matter. His work mattered, his life mattered, and he mattered without all the things he thought would make him matter. And I think that is so important. I think that's one of the things that Elder Gong makes the point of. He mentions like a college athlete who put his sports on hold to serve as a missionary, and the young wife who is mocked in her nursing class because of her beliefs and wearing the temple garment and being married so young and all these things. And so I think it really does matter. And we didn't talk about it too much, but also the big stuff matters. Going to the temple, serving in our callings. But I think the main point of this talk is it's like those aspects of our daily life that really need a drop of holiness to them. Yeah, I love this talk. And the footnotes are great. I've never really appreciated the notes, but he goes through and there's a lot of great references for other people to look up. But yeah, is there anything else you want to say about this talk?
Just piggybacking. Oh my gosh, just going off of what you said. Thank goodness for editing. But usually we think of like going to the temple. The temple is a sacred place, right? We don't really talk about our daily lives being sacred. And I really love how Elder Gong highlights that as like holiness to the Lord makes daily life sacred. So doing those things every day will make your daily life sacred, just like going to the temple is sacred. Your life is sacred. And so that's just something that stuck out to me the whole talk. Our lives are sacred.
Yes. Yeah, they really are. And that's what God wants for us. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's a great place to end on this talk. And yeah, this was phenomenal. Thank you so much, Shelby. It really is special. This is a great talk, and I think this is probably my favorite of Elder Gong's talks so far.
Yeah, it's a great talk.
And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us again on the Conference Talk podcast. This episode, we discussed Elder Garrick W. Gong's talk, Holiness to the Lord in Everyday Life.
If you enjoyed this episode, give us a 5-star rating anywhere you get podcasts.
And check out our website, conferencetalk.org, where you can follow us on social media, drop a comment, check out the show notes, and learn more about us, your hosts.
If you want to follow me, Shelby Christensen, you can find me at ShelbC08 on Instagram.
And you can find me on X, formerly Twitter, at Brett W. Kane.
But while we always appreciate new followers, it's better to follow the prophet and the apostles themselves.
Yep, we love speaking about the church and our leaders, but we do not speak for them. Everything said on this podcast represents our own personal opinions.
Yep. So join us next time in making every weekend conference weekend on the Conference Talk podcast.